politicians they were supporting. And it's still that way. Like if someone today chose to make an investment, if a U.S. citizen chose to make an investment in a foreign currency, it would say something about their belief in the different systems. And I think that belief aspect and the sense to which these choices are tied to people's identities is something that's very easy to overlook. And so I'm curious about the TE Academy ecosystem and the kind of experience that people who, like I'm really enmeshed in it. So I'm curious about other people's perspective about what the experience was like of seeing that community in action.
Yeah, I had a sort of a big aha moment when Angela talked about token engineering being one of the next sort of engineering fronts that developed aside from software engineering in the 60s. And I had this like historical view on what was happening, because when I realized by the second or third session that we were meeting and being encouraged to break out into, host groups around the world, I was like, oh my gosh, this makes perfect sense, because it's got to be part of the process to sort of build based on localized knowledge and very like nuanced cultural knowledge from each region. And I didn't expect that. Like, I guess I understood it conceptually, but I didn't think about it in practice. I wish I had the energy to stay up for the other two classes, but I pulled an all-nighter and I couldn't do it. But that was the biggest takeaway for me, was sort of seeing this movement and this way of working together emerging in real time.
Well, I want to jump in and say that I'm a graviton. I recently finished their training on the DAO conflict and resolution, and it was definitely an eye-opener for me. I felt like that this was a space where I could belong, be my full self, express myself, and it really kind of taught you how to listen to other people from different backgrounds, from different belief systems, and trying to find something in common that you may have with them so that you can, be comfortable mediating and hopefully come up with a solution to whatever problem is going on. When you're in these huge communities, there's always going to be conflict, but conflict isn't a bad thing. It isn't a negative thing. Within conflict, there could be transformation. And I really did enjoy my time with them. I'm going to continue to work with them within this conflict resolution community and helping other DAOs understand this. And it was just a really great experience for me being a part of Gravity and being a part of TEC in this way.
I'd like to dive into that just a little bit, because I really appreciate your sharing that, and I further feel that there's this tension in. There was this essay many years ago called "The Two Cultures" that was roughly speaking like about the clash. It was C.P. Snow, the two cultures, the clash between what roughly might be termed arts and humanities and science and engineering and technology on the two sides. And I think that is very much something that we're seeing right now, not necessarily at this local level of the TE Academy, but I guess the question, let me phrase this as a question, let me not rant. How important do you think it is to differentiate between the hard engineering technical aspect of things and things like the other working groups within the token engineering community that are engaged with things like consent and discussing various cultural and community aspects? I see this big issue. which, as you know, I'm going to be quiet now because I want to hear other people talk about it. But I think that's something that we could discuss that might be productive.
One of the things that concerns me, because I'm not quote unquote, educated, I don't have an advanced degree, was how do I fit in to Web3? What could I offer anyone? Especially during, this boot camp. I don't have the same type of knowledge that many of you have, but I do have something to offer as a community builder. I do have something to offer as someone who is from a marginalized community. I do have something to offer because I spend many, many hours like staying in my head and asking the questions of what if. I do have the heart of a researcher. And as we are continuing kind of diving into Web3, it is important to have everybody, how do I want to say this? Everybody should be able to speak, show up, and have a say as how we are going to build this so that no one is left behind, so that everyone can be heard. We need all sides. We need the technical sides, and we need the, what I would like to say, the human side as well. And I see in some of these communities, there's an imbalance. We don't have both. And you can tell when you come into the community which side may be, I don't want to say lacking, but what side may not be a main concern of the community.
Yes, this is so great. This is so important. Sorry, Octopus, go on. I just wanted to offer a hat tip. I very much align with this line of thought.
Pedro, I was just being old. I want you to talk, please.
What do you mean by just being old?
As I grow older, I feel sometimes I don't lay back enough, and I want to just see. I want to let you. I want to have you have space to talk because I'm really curious about your thoughts.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, just don't call it old. Remember, you're the wizard. It's not about that. Okay, so yeah, I just really resonated with that. I think we should not change in our strive, in our goal for a better internet, a better world. We should not end up switching a case of capitalists for technocracy, right? We need. I'm here to build a world that fits many worlds, right? And that's only possible if it's participatory, if it's not in the hands of a new case, exclusive club or anything like that. And not only that, but all this technology we're building are social technical systems. Are the code is only scaffolding social contracts, right? So in the end, this is a lot more than just engineering and just so I don't keep ranting. This is also a matter of critical mass. Like we can't have only a single bubble, a single perspective responsible for developing such critical infrastructure. We need a critical mass of diversity of fields, of diversity of expertises, and things like that. I'm gonna stop myself here.
So I think I have many things to say about this, but I'll start here. So I think one of the first things you have to do is look at your outputs versus your outcomes. So we can deliver a bunch of wonderful technical outputs and say that we're building systems to do this and building systems to that. And outputs are what we typically think of as deliverables, those things that are more tangible. But the outcomes conversation is a whole other conversation about the impact we want to have. And I think in clarifying what the outcomes, the outputs, and even the inputs are, we start to see who this is really for. Because audiences are constructed, the user is constructed. Everything we do in programs like this, in other programs, is we are deciding who our intended users are. And if the outcomes do not reflect those social contracts, then yes, what we're doing is creating a new kind of a technocracy or aristocracy or whatever cracy. It's going to show up in the outcomes or lack of outcomes. Lack of outcomes that are, what I'm saying again, it's going to show up in the stated outcomes or the fact that the outcomes are unstated.
So I feel that engineering, Dr. Douglas, I want to take a small side trip and reconnect to what you said, if I could, because I just want to provide a little context. My experience has been that as a mathematician, I have a lot of conflict with engineers. A lot of people don't realize mathematics is like more creative than engineering, at least from my perspective. It's a lot more abstract. But in working with engineers, what I've come to realize is that engineering is really a cognitive toolkit. It's a way of thinking about things. It's a set of concepts. And I'm wondering if we could broaden the idea of token engineering to include the type of things you're talking about and that Contessa is talking about of, cognitive tools for thinking about things like audience construction, because I don't have a good framework for that. But when you say it, it resonates with me as something that, wow, that must be valuable. So could anyone elaborate a bit more on, like, are there specific cognitive toolkits we could be aware of or specific practices that could be transferred to us?
Well, I think the whole field of user experience has a lot that kind of ready-made toolkits that we can borrow. I can't get that out. Borrow from in looking at how to direct the user's attention or who is the intended user. So that's one example. But let me go back up and say I do like what you're saying about kind of, I guess this is a side trip, but what you're saying about math is, how conceptual it is. And I heard you talk about this yesterday, and you talked about it more in terms of relationships. But most people don't see math that way. But it's because math is constructed as something that is supposed to result in certain outputs by certain people. And if we thought more about the broader outcomes that we're looking for, then that would necessarily include more people. So when you say that about math, it resonates deeply with me. Like when I think about all the things that you can do with math and all the ways that it applies from a social perspective, from a social justice perspective, it makes perfect sense. But most of us are not engaged with math in that way. So kind of as a side note, but I think to answer your question directly, if you go to the user experience literature, user experience, briefs, blogs, I think there's a lot to pull from there, but I think it would be user experience plus some other ways of thinking, about audience construction. Stakeholder theory is so there's a whole stakeholder salience model. Whose interest are you more vested in? So in business, they talk about managing stakeholders' interests. So we can look in any project and we can see whose interests are considered to be the most important interest in that situation.
I want to kind of frame this in a way that I hope that we have never presented this experience as LTF being established experts and we're just going to like roll information down the mountain to you. It's very much something that we intend to be a co-creation experience. So what we're hoping to do next week is to engage with y'all. I'm from North Carolina, so I say y'all. Engage with y'all about ways that we can engage with you and letting you take a more active role in creating some of these things. Listen, I will talk about the mathematics of automatic market maker curves for the next 4 hours if you let me. But that doesn't, that's a very limited context. And while that is important, there are some big picture ideas related to tokens that I think we have a chance to explore based on the fact that we've intentionally chosen participants who have a wide variety of backgrounds. So I just want to kind of, as a teaser for that, when we post tomorrow, we'll be inviting you to, present some of these things and in a more structured way.
Yes, this is very important. Sorry, go on.
No, Pedro, earlier you mentioned you were ranting. I want to make an exchange with you. I won't call myself old if you won't say that your valuable knowledge drops are ranting.
Deal.
Yeah. Go ahead, Pedro. Did you have thoughts or?
I just wanted to resonate. I think this is about what I tried to communicate since the kickoff. How this is a co-learning experience. How important it is that the learning journey is lived, is embodied, and that like I love the image. It's not about throwing knowledge from the top of the hill. And I think we had a productive 2 weeks experience trying to understand the pace, trying to understand who are the people most interested in on that goal, on that vision. And now that we're about to finish the first, I think the first quarter of the bootcamp, we're ready for a second phase, a second stage, like you described. More participatory.
So I would say that something I have only realized the value of this year, the last 6 months, is the importance of frameworks. I had a really good grasp on specific tools and processes, but I've begun to realize that there are these frameworks that are kind of setting the entire narrative. And Mike, who was it? The Frog People, Wonderland, the Danny and
absolutely, yep. Frog Nation,
yeah,
yep.
Just think about for 2 months they were masters of mimetic engineering, of meme engineering. They had a whole culture and a whole narrative, and like all of what's that?
It's still going.
Yeah. Well, all I'm saying is that I think successful token projects are ones that have some sense of building culture, whether that happens organically, like I think early Bitcoin culture grew out of the cypherpunk movement, which had been existing since the 70s, and it was just, or whether a token project is intentionally engaging in practices to build a culture. I think cultural build is not something we might traditionally think of as engineering or traditionally think of as economics, but it's crucial. So I just want to open that discussion for any...
Yeah, Dr. P, to build off what you just said, it's kind of interesting because the tech, in a very odd way, changed the process. So traditional, you'd have an idea, you build it, you work on it, and then you go to market. because you have the idea built and credibility. But the chain reversed it. It says, hey, give me money first, and then I'm going to go build it. And again, whether it's right or wrong, the idea is that, that's how, I guess, an innovation gets going. And so, does anyone else have any feedback from yesterday's token engineering birthday celebration? Any of the content and workshops that they pulled out?
I have a question not related to that. Pedro, you said something earlier that I want to get down because I want to quote you on this. I think you said something to the effect that technology provides the scaffolding to social contracts. Can you restate that, please?
Yeah, that was exactly it. Not any and not all technology, but the technology we're building in the Web3, these social technical systems. In the end, the bottom line of blockchain-based solutions, we have social contracts. That's the key value from forkability. If you if you disrespect a social contract, people can literally just stand up and fork and try again. Just as an example, right? We have the Code is Law tribe, which constantly prove themselves wrong. We had, besides the historical the DAO hack, we had recently a blockchain event where they sold NFTs as the conference ticket, and someone tried to front run things. They bought like 60 tickets with a bot or something, and then organizers just, hey, you're disrespecting our social contract here. Your NFTs are now void. And then those front runners were like complaining, oh no, code is law. Why are you doing this? You promised this. And people, besides laughing of them, were pointing out how no, code isn't law. From my perspective, again, code, the dry language, as some try to call it, is only there to scaffold, to structure, support these social contracts.
Thank you.
And yeah,
my crypto anarchist ideal would involve code being law, but with the caveat that it would require people an opportunity to be educated to the point that there was a real chance for people to understand the code, that there were really careful auditing processes and people were very clear about what agreements they were making. Like those are logic issues, that they could not encode their intentions adequately in the computer logic, and that's a security flaw. But I mean,
I think this is an interesting perspective. Yeah. So one of the reasons that I don't code, even though I have basic knowledge of some programming languages, is that it's uncomfortable for me, the idea of me struggling to be understood by the machine, by the computer. I would rather have the computer struggle to understand me. So I think one way we could get closer to Coda's law would be code itself evolving a lot more. So we would have, like, natural language would have Ricardian contracts, right? For those of you who are not familiar, Ricardian contracts are contracts that can be both legally and technically valid at the same time. We would have AI assisted coding. We would have several advancements supporting something close to Coda's law, I think.
I think if there were a greater diversity of representations, this is exactly connecting to the earlier conversation we had about, certain mathematical culture being exclusionary. which I personally, I like to blame that on the engineers, because the engineering discipline has had more money and more prestige in the academic world over the last 70 years. So they've increasingly been in a position to dictate to mathematics departments what introductory courses would look like. And that's happening now also with computer science, that computer science can come to mathematics and say, look, you need to teach this course this way. And the mathematician says, well, that's not my view of it. And so that's like this whole interconnected web of exchange, of ideas exchange and agreements. That's a tangent. Let me come back to this. If there were a way where, for instance, we really felt that anyone could read a smart contract and understand it, then that would be different. And that might mean that, for instance, there's a visual representation of the smart contract, and somebody could just look at it and say, that has too much blue. I don't feel good about that. Like tools of representation and mapping, so that it's not just a narrow technical gateway of only software engineers or very technically focused people can engage with this, that sort of you can actually have a discussion with the code, and we could create ways to do. Does that make any sense?
What you're saying makes perfect sense, because in hearing, and I do understand the sentiment of code is law. I get it. And I get the necessity of it and how it relates to security. But there are two tenets of white supremacy that I hear in there. Number one is that quantity is more important than quality, and also that the worship of the written word. And so what that does is that necessarily excludes a lot of people from the conversation.
I instantly got afraid. And the reason why I got afraid is because of all the inherent bias that's already in code, that's already in AI technology. And I'm wondering, what else am I going to be excluded from?
Yeah, those are really important perspectives. I'd be open to hearing a lot more.
Yes, I think we as a society are only starting to scratch the surface on the inherent biases in the structures we have, in the structures we're raising. It's funny how how fast AI evolves, and it makes easier to highlight that bias, and how experimental it still is. So it's harder for people to mask, to hide some of those biases, but it's really everywhere, right? So again, I really like to repeat that. But again, when we build worlds that fit many worlds, we have to start taking those things into consideration, not looking for a magical solution, not for finding like a universal solution, but again, finding room for a multitude of solutions, a plurality.
I mean, the original idea of Bitcoin was founded in a very voluntarist ideology of like, if the system didn't work for people, they would not be required to participate. And it's difficult to imagine governance structures where opting out or just choosing a different governance structure is actually an option.
That reminds me of something I really like, but I want to wait you finish what you're saying.
No, that's all I had.
So one of the things that I was planning on bringing for next week is the element of fiction, the element of narrative, maybe even explore how narratives are also a type of social primitive, and like now how you mentioned the ability of opting out of governance systems. There is this very interesting speculative fiction book from this amazing author The book is called Infomocracy. I'll post the link later. But this is a governance science fiction from a researcher that is specialized, that is focused on disaster governance. And this book imagines a world where borders, near-term future, where borders were dissolved and rearranged in sentinels, in groups of 100,000 people. And these sentinels, they have their own policies. Migration is made incredibly easy, and people can move to sentinels where they feel aligned to the policies the most. And you have this sort of merge between a Wikipedia like organization with a UN like organization, where they facilitate the global knowledge management, helping add subtext, text, helping add context to all the plurality of people and their backgrounds. And in the end, you have such an interesting story about how different organization frameworks can look like in the future. I'm really interested by her work. I'm really interested in her book. I'll post the link here later. And I'm looking forward to exploring more fiction with you all, both speculative fiction from others, but also our own design fiction, our own fiction as a tool for understanding and envisioning futures together.
Well, this has been I'm really grateful for the ideas and the energy that everyone has brought to this discussion. And I'm looking forward to continuing it in future weeks. There was some information that we wanted to share from the LTF side about the events that have been happening recently, just to share some information with you. But we'll be back in touch on the Discord very soon with the plan for next week, which will include engaging with you in the topics of discussion and the resources that are available. So, Mike, would you share the long tail, the side information that we had lined up?
Yeah, we're happy to share it after the workshop. Yeah. Does anyone else have any other comments that they want to bring to the table about any of the conversations that we've had today?
I wanted to share, and I have a question for Contessa. I think one of the things that's interesting that Kimberly highlighted is the outcomes versus outputs, and this can be very difficult for me to try to say, but I'm going to put together as best as I can. It seems to me that the process of participation is one of those first invisible areas that defines what tracks a user goes down or a group goes through, whether they're conscious of it or not. And so I tend to think of education or framework around like pedagogy being very important, because as Contessa said, and this is something I really resonate with, is there's a level of like feeling like you're allowed to be at the table when you don't have the information, or you feel like it's inherently exclusive because, for example, the education system already created sort of a you have your ticket or you don't with the degree concept. And so I find that to be very kind of front and center for me. So when I think about the process of building a new system, it starts from that level, like actually understanding where a user is, even in whether they're conscious or awake of their own implanted consciously or unconsciously ways of like opting out of participating in a process. For me, what it was growing up was I loved being a mediator. I got taught to be a mediator in middle school. And I felt very confused when I realized mediation was no longer a thing post 7th grade, because I learned it in 6th grade. And what I feel like I grew up in was a society that valued less the management of, or making room for emotions or the dynamics around conflict, and then looked to just fast track you into a career, which we know today is like a big joke, because obviously conflict resolution is a thing in workplace and culture, and workplace matters. So I share all this to kind of like make room to say, like, it's so cool to hear that there's a gravitron here, because I find that incredibly valuable. One, because it's something I want to learn from, but also two, it just shows the value of this space. But I also shared in the link chat a few discussion protocols that I learned. One I got to practice a few years ago with an indigenous community who was starting to bridge the conversation around race and power within the education system here in Alaska. And I want to share that because it was fascinating to create a simple social agreement that we used across the state to really handle both positions of power and authority, but also different roles, different ways of having difficult conversations within different size rooms. Like they could be as small as like in-house, like privately invited conversations to larger, like whole teaching associations. But I find that process very important. How people engage with something makes a difference in what emerges on the other side.
Yeah, I kind of what's really when I hear what you say, it's fascinating because it brings me back to why I was drawn to this innovation. Like, the digitization of stuff, the tracking, the ledger technology, that whole just process smashes many disciplines like computer science, economics, law, world studies, business, and I think that's what I feel is happening, because you're having all these disciplines capable of contributing because you're building a new digitized system. And so, the dynamics that we see, like this is all about thermodynamics. This is all about flow. This is all about, on the financial side of the application and the technology, it's about liquidity and money. But as this is getting reshaped and social contracts are being brought in, new innovations to view the technology, i.e. the NFT, which is a very fascinating view of the tech. I still believe it's done more for the public to understand the blockchain innovation than Bitcoin did when it launched, or even Ethereum does now. So I think I think you're onto something, and I view it as just a smashing of and the collision of disciplines.
Oki, I would love to sit down and have a conversation with you at some point about this. A concern of mine, as we're sitting down here talking about ReFi and helping our communities, is, are we even listening to the community members? Have we sat down and spoken to them? Have we asked, hey, I know that we see this, but we're not even from your community. We haven't even spent time in your community. Are we talking to elders? Are we talking to people about how they interact in their day-to-day lives before we come in and say, I think this will be good for you? And this is how lands have been colonized in the past. And I don't want to see that happen again now, just using tokenomics and token engineering. I don't want to see the same process again. And that's a major concern of mine as a community builder, especially if someone from a marginalized community. Are we really paying attention to what we're doing as we're coming into these new spaces?
I appreciate sharing. That's a cool thinking.
Yes, thank you for that.
I'd like to add, if I view this through a lens of optimization, just from the tech perspective, because you're not going to optimize, this tech isn't going to optimize equal in all industry. It's not. There's an asymmetrical application to this. And I think it's finding that optimal balance.
Yeah, if I could just quickly add to, I think that's one of the challenges that the industry and the technology and a lot of DAOs governance models are facing. Exactly what you said here, Contessa. Uh, my my hope, and I would say my optimism lies in the fact that a lot of people have their ideas and minds in the right place. At least I'm hoping so. And so the ideological reason to kind of make sure that that doesn't happen again, or we are more fair to like diverse thought and ideas and equal able to provide equal opportunity, not just theoretically but in practical usage. I think that's what the technology and the industry is at least trying to work for. uh, Having said that, I recognize completely the challenges that you're kind of presenting.
It doesn't serve anyone to optimize the wrong thing. And the technical perspective is often to jump into how do we optimize this, and to be impatient about discussions of what are our actual what are our actual outcomes, instead of focusing on just optimizing the outputs. I really appreciate that distinction that you shared with me, and I'm going to hold on to it.
Um, I don't want to, in any way, I don't want to sound adversarial or too contrarian. But sometimes I have this idea, this perception that yes, there are actors, there are agents that intentionally add noise to the system, intentionally add inefficiencies to the system. They are playing different games from a game theory perspective, that they actually benefit from inefficient systems, from systems that have a unbalanced noise to signal ratio. And this is, I find this very interesting from the token engineering perspective, because sometimes when we tackle challenges, we rely too much on the assumption that some inefficiencies are there because they haven't been optimized yet. But sometimes you have inefficiencies entrenched in a Pareto distribution, or simply to benefit a specific group of actors, right? It's like, we tend to be optimists about how we can improve inefficiencies of the role. Um, but too many of those are intentionally there. And it's not a matter of optimizing, but actually a matter of social struggle. I think when we tackle the challenges that ReFi is aiming at tackling, it there's the risk of ending up with gardening instead of environmental struggle. There's the risk of us designing systems that will optimize for low hanging fruits, for example, and skip or try to work around core social struggles. Yes, exactly, Contessa. Yeah, there's the meme or the saying that the system is not broken, the system is working as intended, just not for us. And I mean that's why it's so interesting to compose, to bring together, merge the engineering aspect, the social psychology aspect, critical thinking aspect together, because we're building social technical systems. We are aiming. I believe we're aiming for anti-fragile and anti-fragility against technical challenges and constraints, social technical constraints, political constraints, and it brings risks that we're not comfortable with contemplating. I don't know.
Pedro, I want to personally say I really appreciate your sharing that perspective. I understand not wanting to be adversarial. I also want to say I think the adversary is a very valuable role in the development of an idea. And in cybersecurity, we have the idea red team, whose job is to figure out how to attack the system. And I think a lot of times in cryptocurrency, we lack sort of an intellectual red team. It's just like nonstop enthusiasm, build faster, and the cracks aren't revealed because people don't want to speak up and say that there might be problems with something. So, I personally appreciate when you draw attention to those aspects of the system that are vulnerable or fragile.
Yes, you brought something that I really like, that is trying to use the logic of penetration tests, of pen tests, like you mentioned, as red team and blue team, to non-technical systems. So we really need more pen tests for narratives, for culture, for vision. This is something I'm extremely interested in. I'm hoping to explore more of that next week with us together.
Well, we're approaching the wire here. It's a 55 after. So, do we have any other thoughts, or should we make it a wrap?
Before we wrap, I just want to really express my gratitude to everyone who shared their thoughts today, and to say that I really appreciate the opportunity to hear your perspectives, and I look forward to discussing them more. They've been really the opportunity to hear new perspectives is something that I cannot generate by myself, and it's really I like to have that ability to think about ideas that I've held from different views. So I really am grateful for that.
Yeah, I second that.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. P. All right. Well, fabulous. Everyone have a great day. And I guess we'll all catch up with each other. Pedro will share some material with the group after the call and stuff, or throughout the day, and set up the next tasks for next week, right?
Yeah, tomorrow, today, I'm gonna share the recording of this call. Again, I'd like to make myself available for one-on-ones, or any group call regarding your overall bootcamp experience. Count on us.